What's your scariest work experience? I was working for a biotech company and an unknown substance spilled on me. I was freaking out for quite a while. Realizing the senior VP was going to be on the conference call that I didn't prepare for 5 minutes before it started. I spin a sign on the side of the road advertising ice cream for a local mom and pop store. An undercover cop pulled over a drug dealer right next to me, had him get out of the car, frisked him, then confiscated a gun he didn't have a license for. I awkwardly stood there advertising orange swirl ice cream. I was working in a mall at a burger joint when I looked up and saw a guy coming out of a men's room nearby holding a bloody butcher's knife. The man calmly walked through the food court and out the mall exit as my manager and I both looked at each other not believing what we saw. I swear 1 minute later as we're trying to call security 15 cops ran by with guns drawn. Turns out the man had stabbed someone to death in the bathroom. The cops were there so fast because the same man had violently assaulted someone else the day before and escaped. He was recognized by a witness prior to going into the bathroom. TLDR. Saw aftermath of a homicide while flipping burgers in a mall. I used to work with burrowing owls. We check nests with a long flexible camera and a visor over our eyes. Well, one day I head into this field, kneel down, put the visor on, check the nest. Takes about 15 minutes. I stretch up and take the visor off. About 50 cows are in a circle 360 degrees around me, staring at me with their cold, dead eyes. I have no idea how I didn't feel them walking over. They started to get nervous and excited as I packed up my stuff and parted so I could see one very pissed off bull at the back of the herd. I did my very best calm speed walk out of there. TLDR. I hate cows with a fiery passion. Edit. Alone in the Bolivian rainforest. First day working on my own. I hear this. I was convinced I was about to be eaten by a grue. I work at a scatter park. A few months ago, we had a guy try to just ride up and nick the coping with his trucks, the 7-foot quarter pipe we call the tombstone. His trucks caught up, so he kicked out, wound up landing back on the end of his board and shooting out. He smacked his head on the quarter pipe hard enough to break his helmet, and laid on the ground unconscious for a few seconds before going into a seizure. Had to call the ambulance and try and help him out. It took the ambulance 15 minutes to finally arrive. My boss went to visit him in the hospital and the doctor said if he hadn't been wearing his helmet, he'd be dead. So kids, that is why I'm an asshole about the helmet rule. TLDR. Wear your damn helmet. Edit. Some people are having trouble with the lingo. So here. Trucks, metal things that hold wheels to the skateboard deck. / kind of, not exactly but close enough. Tombstone. Pick from the park where I work. Seizure. One summer I was painting the gondola towers at a ski resort in Vermont, and I'd spend half my day climbing the ladders 100 feet up, harnessing onto the top rung, and swinging around painting the arms that hold up the gondola lines. The ladder rungs only give you enough room for maybe an inch to actually stand on, so it's a bit nerve-wracking to climb up to begin with. Plus this fear of heights that I basically pretended I didn't have. Anyway, one day, smoke a bowl with the boss. He drops me off and I make my ascent. It's a beautiful day out. I get to the top, harness on, and climb out one of the arms and start painting and I slipped. Luckily my harness caught me, but it pissed off the wasps I hadn't noticed. The rest is a blur of me scrambling back for the ladder, waving madly at the wasps attacking me, struggling to unscrew the carabiner to get my harness off and flying down a 100-foot ladder trying to not plummet down to the concrete block down below while getting stung over and over again. Don't let anyone fool you. Wasps are pure evil, and you have a fear of heights for a damn good reason. When I worked as a waiter, I always remember a chunky steak knife slipping off a plate I was carrying and watching it fall tip first, landing at the bottom of the stairs a couple floors below, a split second after someone walked right in front of it. I used to work in a dementia ward. I've been bitten, peed on, had things thrown at me and attacked by a guy who was hallucinating. But the scariest thing was when one of the electric fireplaces caught fire and 2 of the men in the ward locked their doors. The time between calling 911 and the fireman getting those two outside was terrifying. I was working construction in the world's biggest oil refinery when there was an explosion maybe 50 yards from me, and a mushroom cloud fireball shot into the air. We ducked behind some big concrete pipes, since you never expect only one explosion in a refinery, but nothing else happened. I don't consider it my scariest work experience by any means, but this is probably the one Redditors would like best for this thread. When I was working at a daycare, there was a terrifying accident that came so close to hitting the playground. My class of 2-year-olds being closest to the fence. We all heard a loud screeching. It was a car skidding, going against traffic. It hit 2 cars, which caused a series of other accidents from sheer panic of the other drivers. One of the preschoolers told me the day after, "I don't wanna die. That won't make mama very happy." The man in the car almost took me away from her. I work at an electronic buyback store. One day a customer brought by a new 20 inches LCD monitor in the box. I made an offer and he was more than willing to sell me his product. We normally check all items to make sure they work before we pay out for them, so I decided I'd open the box and take a look inside. As soon as I opened the box, over 100 cockroaches come crawling out of it and all over my counter. It took me a good couple seconds to realize what exactly was coming out of the box, but it was both scary and gross. TLDR, someone opened a box full of cockroaches at my store. This isn't scary in the way I think you mean, but I had a job working for a fashion designer that I was highly underqualified for. Doing accounting, I invoiced a major account incorrectly, which could result in them getting a 10% discount on the order, which was in the 6 figures. I read one date wrong and almost lost the small company $20,000 plus because of a careless mistake. My boss had to do serious begging and dealing with them to get it taken away. But the moment when I realized my mistake made me go into a serious panic attack that I had to cover up in order to look professional. I sobbed on the way to the train that day, realizing how much I could have really ducked up their lives if they hadn't taken away the discount. It was my first day of training to work as a caregiver at an assisted living center for the elderly. I'd only been there a couple of hours. I was walking up a back staircase with the guy who was supposed to be training me, when we saw another employee laying curled up on a bench at the top of the stairs. The guy with me recognized her and said she worked the night shift. I figured she had fallen asleep and sort of nervously chuckled. He shook her a little to try to wake her up, but she didn't stir. Eventually we rolled her over, and then we saw that she was clearly dead. Her eyes were completely open and bloodshot and her tongue was bulging from her mouth. They later figured out she had suffered a brain aneurysm while she was working. Probably sat down on the bench because her head hurt and she died there. I figured I would eventually find one of the elderly residents dead while working there, but I didn't expect to find a co-worker, and on my first day, 2 of our bulls were fighting and busted through a fence. We tried to push them back into a paddock, but while we were doing it, one bull basically picked up the other and threw him at me. At a shooting range, I hate new shooters. They get so excited about shooting anywhere in the same zip code of the target that they whip around to say, "Did you see that?" and end up waving their gun at you. Scary. Sitting in the same courtroom as one of the state's most dangerous sex offenders, I can safely say I have now been in the presence of true evil. Attending a fatal car crash where the family of the guy who was killed was standing on the side of the road screaming with grief. Those sounds just cut straight to the bone. I used to manage a pizza place, and one Friday around 11:30 am, a guy came in, looking no different than any of the other crack meth heads in the neighborhood. We asked how his day was. He said fine. And then we asked what he'd like to order. He said, "Give me the ducking money." The cashier said, "What?" And he repeated, "Give me the ducking money." He put his hand inside his jacket and pointed something from the inside. Hindsight tells me it was probably just his hand and not a real gun. But it's not the kind of thing you want to take chances with. The cashier slowly moved to open the drawer and set it on the counter, and the guy grabbed what he could and ran out the door. The guy ended up only taking about $100. Basically, what the register had been started at, since we'd only been open for 30 minutes. It was just a helpless feeling though, being in charge and having a cashier potentially put in danger like that. I was working at a camera store and it was Christmas Eve. A man walked into the store shortly before our closing time and said he wanted to return what was an expensive camera kit. The procedure for any return was to open the box, briefly look to make sure the parts were there and proceed with the return process. The moment I opened the box and glanced at the contents, the man became absolutely furious. "Wait, what are you doing? We just have to make sure there aren't any missing components. Sir, everything looks fee. Are you calling me a thief? You racist bitch. Are you calling me a thief?" He then lunged over the counter, grabbed my arm with all his might and tried to drag me over to his side. Apparently, the fact that he was black and I was white was enough to tell him that I was a bigot who deserved to be physically assaulted. Luckily, my manager had the sense to pry the man off me and put him in his place. I'm pretty darned passive and polite, so this really caught me off guard and sent my heart racing for a good long time afterward. I was at a client site supervising the installation of some new major 4000A, 480V switchgear. There was a manufacturer's rep there to help troubleshoot any problems we had during energizing the gear for the first time. So everything went smoothly at first. Opened all the feeder breakers and then closed the main incoming 4000A breaker. So far so good. As we slowly close the smaller feeder breakers one by one, we get to one that trips as soon as we try to close it. It was probably wired wrong. So the rep opens the main breaker to kill power to gear. He opens the malfunctioning breaker and sticks his hands in there to check the wiring. The dude ducking yelps, jumps back and his hard hat comes flying off his head. For about half a second, I thought for sure I just watched someone die. Turns out the idiot forgot to discharge the control wiring, so he only got a minor shock from a small charged capacitor. As the construction manager, I had to write up the incident and had a very serious conference call with his employer. I think he might have been fired. I worked at a 5-star rated haunted house for a good 4 years. It was seasonal. My job was to be an evil clown and my role was to spontaneously appear to the groups that were walking through. Many scary things have happened to me. I've been punched, thrown to the floor, scratched and have had people try and rip off my mask. I've even seen people wet themselves and vomit on themselves. However, my all-time most scariest experience was when someone actually started dying in front of me. A woman walking through passed out in front of me in the walkway. After I tried helping her up, she began shaking and was trying to say something I couldn't make out. The fire alarm is in the hall, so it was my first reaction to pull it. My manager ran right up to me and took over. Her eyes were already rolled to the back of her head by the time the ambulance got there and they were able to save her. The next day we were told she had an allergic reaction walking through the body bag room, which is a room full of elastic, and that was what she was allergic to. The body bag room soon turned into the asylum. I was working in the lab without goggles, since I was only working with a water bath at around 40 degrees Celsius, when all of a sudden the thermometer exploded, sending one half of it flying at my face. The sharp side of it hit me 1 centimeter medial to my eye on the bridge of my nose. TLDR thermometer blew up and missed, impaling my eye by 1 centimeter. My uncle was working in an iron ore in Western Australia a few years back, driving a bulldozer. He was sent down to an area of the pit that had recently been blown up and noticed the red tag of a shot that hadn't exploded just before he ran over the top of it. They found around 10 ton of ANFO that hadn't gone off during the shot. TLDR. My uncle almost ran over 10 ton of high explosive in a bulldozer. This is while I was participating in a peacekeeping mission in the Balkans. I got asked by a friend of mine who was a helicopter crew member if I wanted to tag along on recon flight. Me being an office bunny who rarely got off base, I took the opportunity. I foolishly agreed to go before even knowing where they were going to recon at. The place where we were headed was an encampment of towed surface-to-air missiles. I was the only person on the bird who knew this because it was part of my job too, but I wasn't permitted to tell the pilot. So I'm flying around over an active SAM site I know could shoot us down, but I can't do anything about it. It scared the hell out of me. I work at a tech help desk that also fields directory calls from the main line of the university. I picked up a directory call one day from an elderly woman who claimed to be very ill. You could also tell from her voice that she was trying quite hard to hang in there. and was trying to find a department inside of our medical center that would be able to match her symptoms up with a specific illness. Except, the department name that she gave me was actually for the janitorial service. I suppose they liked their euphemisms and decided to call it something fancier. After a few minutes of trying to find this non-existent part of the medical center, which is humongous and has tons of departments, as she wheezed and sounded generally unwell, I transferred her to the patient care line there. Hopefully they got her where she needed to go. I worked in a call center for a large US telecommunications company in sales for 5 years. A woman called in one day, depressed and needing to talk to someone. Her husband just died. She lost her only child a year prior, and she said she wanted to kill herself. This lady had it planned out in great detail, which is why I was even more concerned. I highly suggested 911 because they are trained to handle this sort of thing. At the end of the day, she just needed someone to talk to. I ended up talking her out of suicide over the phone, and giving her a few other resources I knew of, Suicide Prevention Lifeline, NAMI, etc. You'd think working for a phone company in sales you get some odd characters that call in and it makes for an entertaining story. But this particular incident certainly threw me for a loop. Regardless, at the end of the day, I'm glad this woman didn't take her own life. I was waiting on a table with a little girl who had severe allergies. She wanted broccoli but without butter on it. Sure, we could do that no problem. Her mother made sure I understood how deathly allergic she was. So before I served the side, I double checked that it didn't have butter in it. I went ahead and served it along with the rest of the meal when it was ready. A few minutes later a co-worker came running out of the kitchen with the actual side of broccoli. I had given the girl the wrong side of broccoli. I went to explain the situation to her mother who did not have her medicine. I stood there like an idiot while she informed me that her daughter could very well die. It was a surreal moment. I walked back into the kitchen, only to find the cooks and a couple servers laughing. Apparently I had served the right one after all and they had accidentally made two sides without butter. The girl's mother and I, not so much. Had just finished wiring up a fuse panel on a commercial installation. 440 volt line into two 220 volt bars down the back. The guy I was helping, journeyman, called the boss over, master electrician, to check his work. The panel was lit so there was a juice running down those bars in the back of the panel. Boss walks up and starts looking over and goes to read a label that was partially obscured by a bit of debris from the power drill. He sticks his hand out and starts reaching into the box and the journeyman electrician stiffened and gripped on this broom he was holding as the boss's fingers pass within an inch or less of these bars as he brushes off the debris. Boss says, "Looks good. Great work. Now finish up," and walks off. The guy I was working with turns to me, white as a ghost and eyes as big as saucers, and says, "Holy it, I thought I was going to have push him off the circuit with a broom." I quit the next day. Duck everything about electricity. That can duck you up. So what's your scariest UOC experience? And started writing about Emder. I was working in a car parking lot when the movie theater next door exploded from a gas leak. It was unoccupied as it was being renovated. Parts of the building fell down all around me, ducked inside of the small booth we had in the lot. Nearly fell down the top of a high set of oily stairs in a factory I used to work at. Some stupid ducker left a small screw on the top step. Would have broken my neck, man. Managed to grab the stair banister while my feet were still in the air. First day on the job as a park ranger. Chopping wood for later. Bee flies into my face. Miss the swing completely. Axe headed for leg. I could feel the air from the axe go by. It missed by about an inch. That's why you always listen to safety instructions. I work in a building with floor to ceiling glass. I looked out the window of my office and saw a funnel cloud. Thankfully it didn't touch down and become a tornado. My office sent out a message and said get away from the windows. Get away from the windows in an all glass building. Oh acute, oh acute, oh acute, oh acute. I work in the woodshop at the college I attend. It's usually really quiet in there so I just sit and do homework, watch movies, etc. One day last semester there was a guy on the table saw who knew what he was doing so I wasn't paying much attention to him. I was watching Black Swan on my laptop. Right after the part where Natalie Portman peels off a chunk of skin from a hangnail, the guy walks up to me and says, "Oh, I had an accident." I look down to see him holding the fingers of his left hand in his right hand. He opened up his palm to show me a pool of blood and the last 1/4 of his index and middle fingers gone. Apparently he had tried to move a piece of wood away from the blade while it was still moving and brushed them up against the teeth. That's all it takes, man. TLDR. Guy cut off the tips of his fingers on the table saw. Very similar to an experience I had. In college I was a bank teller and I was making small talk. This guy had a ball cap on low and sunglasses. I asked if he'd take them off, and he did. But he lowered his ball cap even more. I asked him what his hat said on it. It had a bunch of little writing. And I really wasn't freaked out at all at this point. He says, "Maybe it says give me all the money on your cash drawer," or something to that effect. I told him that you can't say that in a bank, and he said he wasn't joking. I hit the silent alarm right away. You aren't supposed to until the robber is gone, but whatever. He finished his transaction, walked out, and was arrested at his car. Claimed it was a joke. He got a barring notice from all of my bank's branches for life. Being a teller is easy work, but the prospect of being robbed is always out there. I once accidentally the whole database. Crossing a group of 5 railroad tracks with a 35-foot ladder. Had to carry the ladder. Make sure I didn't trip and fall on the 3rd rail. Make sure I stepped high enough so I wouldn't step on the 3rd rail, and all within a timely manner so that I could cross before a train passed. Public high school teacher here. Bullets flying through the parking lot one morning as students enter campus. 2 kids hit in the leg. It was a random drive-by and the kids who got hit weren't even bangers. I hit the ground and thought it was all over. Went on and taught class all day trying to stay calm and reassuring to the kids. But I think I shook for about 3 hours. Worked for a masonry company a few years back. Potentially long story short, I'm on a ladder attached to scaffolding about 35 feet in the air when a co-worker starts shaking it. After I kindly tell him to duck off, I make it up and over the top to see the ladder partially detach from the scaffolding and drop backwards to a 60-degree angle or so. Turns out it wasn't properly secured and I'm kind of a big guy, so I'm not exactly convinced it would have held me had it happened 10 seconds earlier. You know, reading your story made me think of safety measures. Picture this. You work at a retail store. You have a trapdoor located along the entire front strip of your counter where a customer or a robber would normally stand when trying to rob you. Trapdoor leads to a deep bit that would be impossible to climb out of without a ladder or rope. You go to open the safe to get the money for the robber. Inside the safe is a button that is in there because of how dangerous this button is. Because pressing it releases the trapdoor. The robber falls into the trapdoor. Call police. Done deal. I was building a house in Colorado and was outside with a co-worker pulling some utility wire out of the ground. The sky was dark but it hadn't started raining, so we continued on working until a lightning bolt ripped out of the sky and simultaneously hit the trees above us and the building next to us. Just flash. Boom. And then a bunch of branches and needles raining down on our heads. The lightning was absorbed into the steel inside the foundation and discharged by blowing a hole through the concrete in one of the rooms. There were chunks of concrete embedded in the adjacent drywall. Scary as hell. I'm lucky as it. 17 years old. Bagger at Safeway. Collecting carts from the parking lot. One of those crypt keeper old ladies in a 30-year-old Cadillac wants to park in the handicapped spot in front of the store, but somebody left a cart there. I went to grab it, and she pulled a farmer's market on me. Tried to hit the brake. Hit the gas instead. Freaked out when the car didn't stop and stomped down. Still on the gas. The next second or so is a bit hazy, but I jumped out of the way. Forgot to let go of the cart. The car took care of that, ripping the cart out of my hands, bouncing it off the building. It flew over my head back into the parking lot. Her car then caught air going over the cement pylon at the front of the space, flattened the handicapped sign, slammed into one of those 500-pound concrete trash cans, which also headed my way but also missed, then slammed into the concrete front of the building. Her car then settled down onto the remains of the handicapped sign, the post making its way somewhere up into the engine. I ended up with just a sore wrist from when the cart was ripped from my hands. Thank God she wasn't driving a Prius. I think the only reason I knew to jump out of the way was because 8-cylinder engines are loud when you stomp on the gas.